views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
Hey everybody, it is time for the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronxnet's program where we talk to writers and journalists and photographers and videographers, people involved in media, so you can get a little background as to what they're thinking, what they're saying, what they're doing when they put stuff out for us. What is really wonderful about this evening's program is we have two editors who write about the Bronx and Bronx issues, and so we're going to do one after the other. The one that we are going to start with is my good buddy Michael Hinman, who is the editor of the Riverdale Press. Hello, Mr. Hinman. How are you?
Hey, Gary. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. Always enjoy, as you know, because I tell you, reading the Riverdale Press. We have a number of issues in front of us. Let's start about this story. I don't know if you broke the story. Who knows who breaks what? But this story about Senator Biaggi and her office and her chief of staff leaving, and then a deputy chief of staff. Do we look at this and think there's some upheaval going on or some problem, or just another day of business in the state legislature?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, we don't still have all the full information exactly, what transpired. I mean, what we understand is that, the chief of Senator Biaggi's chief of staff, and names are like escaping me all of a sudden. But Senator Biaggi's chief of staff, Andrew Mutnick, had left his job probably a few weeks ago, and then his deputy, Christian Amato, was let go on Friday. We're not quite clear what happened there, and I mean, I don't know if that really means that there's anything nefarious going on or anything else, but I think that sometimes what we see, and I don't know if this is just me speculating what could have happened based on what happens sometimes elsewhere, is when you have new people get in office, people who weren't previously elected in office before, and now they're suddenly in office and they have staffs to fill and everything else. They tend to pull people who worked really hard for them on their campaigns. And, and it makes sense because these are people they work really well with. But at the same time, they might not necessarily be the best people to work in an environment where you're dealing with other legislators, where you're dealing with a much different system. Like the whole system in Albany, it's way different than what you see everywhere else, and what you see in regular life.
But Michael, let me just interject. And so the skills that somebody brings to the table, let's say being a good campaigner, organizing the public, may not be, and this is pure speculation on both of our part, may not be the kinds of skills that somebody needs when it comes to managing an office or dealing with other senators or things that you didn't have to deal with. And I'm going to add something else. We're not evaluating Senator Biaggi and any of the work that she's done. I think she's seen passing of a lot of the things that she, kind of promised about. If you're a good campaigner and you do those things well and you presented yourself well, that is a very good background. But then, as you said, managing an office, running a business, so to speak, even though, of course, it's in an elected office, those are different skills. And then it just takes time. That's what I would say. And so I guess my own conclusion and by the way, Joe Koenig wrote this story. He's a wonderful young writer for you. Is like, well, let's just kind of wait and see. She certainly has been a responsive elected official, to say the least. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that a lot of people don't understand what's all involved with that. I mean, as somebody who's been a journalist for a long time, I can tell you that I've probably forgotten more than I can remember the number of times I've been approached by elected officials or people who just got elected to come join their staff in some capacity or another. Usually as a press person, sometimes as a chief of staff. But I always say no because I cover government, but it doesn't mean that I could go inside the inner workings and be able to manage how that works without. I mean, you'd have to put me somewhere where there's already experienced people who could train me because I couldn't just step in and do it for somebody new. And I would do it anyway.
It's an interesting thought. People, to be honest with you, I mean, we just talk personally here. I have not been approached, and I think it's because I've worked very hard to be outside of the realm of advocating for any elected official. So I don't think they would know or trust that I would be able to advocate for them because they say we've never seen him do that. He's always just been moderating the debates. I don't know. It's just a funny thing to think about.
I never really advocate for them either. I don't know. I mean, especially when I was in Florida, it would happen a lot. It hasn't happened up here in New York at least. So maybe.
Right.
Maybe they don't think I'd advocate for anybody, which is probably true.
I don't know if that's the good news or the bad news. Anyway, let's talk about this story that's coming out this week, I guess, in the Riverdale Press. And this is this whole development at a Revolutionary War site. Now, I have not seen your paper yet, so I didn't get to the real facts about it. Some others have reported it. Tell me what this is about and why this would be interesting to us in the Bronx.
Well, I mean, the thing is that there's this plot of land, and there's not a lot of plot of land that have been mostly undeveloped since the 18th century, 16th century, 18th century, whatever that was, whichever way number those goes. But there's Spike and Dival Hill apparently had 3 different forts that were built. I mean, we're not talking like big stone forts with cannons. We're talking like probably like stick build, just kind of wood fences and maybe a wooden building and
maybe places to house people.
There.
Yeah, right.
Not even housing. It was probably just the ammunition. There was no battles there.
Right.
There were no, nobody's buried there. I think one of the people involved that were trying to dig there, one of the historical people were like, even if we found George Washington's teeth there, it's not going to affect anything, and we're not going to stop construction or anything over it. But the thing is that there's not a lot of sites in New York where the land has been undisturbed. The only thing that's ever been there has been a tennis court, and that kind of went away in the 60s. But nobody's ever really dug into the ground, so there's a good possibility that there might be a foundation, or there might be some artifacts, there might be some things that have not ever been dug up, and it's such a rare thing to have in New York City, to have this kind of undisturbed land, so to speak, to where they might find some interesting things, and all they really wanted, I think, was a few days to dig around a little bit. But it just became a big hassle. Like, they had to pull out a $2 million insurance, but then they reportedly received like an NDA that said like you can't talk about whatever you find there ever with anybody.
So is this because there's a developer interested in it and they don't want to find out that, as you said, they'll find George Washington's teeth? Of course, if they were to find a burial ground or something, that would be sacred of a nature, then, that would take all bets off. So is that what we're getting to, is that this is a target for developers?
Well, it is. I mean, there is a plan, a direct plan. I think they're going to begin building as we speak, or very soon. They're going to build some single-family homes there. So there's already plans to build there. And maybe there is. I mean, we couldn't get the actual developer on the phone. We had the property owner talk about it a little bit, who's all for letting them on there, but it's really up to the developer, I guess, on whether that happens. And maybe there is a fear that they're going to find something that would suddenly put a halt to construction. I personally don't feel that that the historical society is looking to do that. I think they're just looking that they have an opportunity, they could pull up some history and just want a couple of days to do it, and then they'll either find stuff or they don't, and then they'll go on their way either way.
Do you think they're going to get that opportunity?
No, it seems like they've already kind of backed off from it, that they decided to pull the plug on it.
So here, Gary's going to play arbitrator in this. I would say this just from a sensible point of view, where you could play, everybody can benefit. Give them a little time. What is the rush? That would be my first thing. So let the Historical Society play it out and give them, a deadline, 2 months, whatever it takes to do it. I mean, you don't want to go 5 years. You do that. Then if they find that this is a place, then you mark it and you develop the area so that it pays respects to that. You put up a plaque, you can do it, and that would enhance the value of the property for the property owner and for the people who move in. Wow, I moved into a place that has some historical significance. I don't know. To me, that would be a nice thing, rather than, we have to have the site and you can't. That's the way I look at it. What can I tell you?
Why do you think they just want a week or two? I don't even think they want 5 months or a year. I think they just want a week. And like I said, even if they find stuff, maybe it's a plaque or something. I don't think they're going to find anything. I mean, it's just it was a fort location. We've had a number of forts in this area, especially in this part of the Bronx, and this is a key area that helps defend the King's Bridge. and we're right on the river. But I don't, even the Historical Society isn't expecting to find anything significant. It's just kind of a cool thing that there might be some neat pieces of the past that's right there in the ground that we can't really get anywhere else. I just want to collect some of it and be on their merry way.
I want to just throw this out. This is not a Riverdale specific thing, and I don't know if it's in your purview. We got about 2 minutes left. And it's well early to talk about this race. I'm talking about the race for Congress to replace Jose Serrano. It's just fascinating to me that Michael Blake, Richie Torres, and now I heard yesterday that Gustavo Rivera has thrown his hat into the ring, and of course Reverend Diaz has announced very clearly that he wants to be the congressman. What do you make of this race? These are all three or four popular Bronx elected officials running against each other for a congressional seat. Fascinating to me, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I love to see that. I love to see that there's a lot of interest in terms of, because I think a lot of times that we have too many seats, but at the smaller level, at the more localized level, where we don't have a lot of candidates for it, where people aren't really having a chance to make a choice. And I like the fact that even though we're looking at career politicians, which maybe we should be anyway, this is a congressional seat, it's nice to see that at least we're getting some choice. We might not like some of the choices, but that's great. At least we're not stuck with picking the lesser of two evils or anything like that. And then there's a lot of times where we have races where nobody's running against somebody, and and the incumbent pretty much wins because nobody's running against them. The whole point of voting is to have a choice.
What is fascinating to me about that is that everybody that I've talked to, and now they're telling me we're going to have to get out of here in a second, but everybody I've talked to said, well, there's black and there's Hispanic and there's this. I wonder if I would love it if whatever the result is, it breaks down those ethnic barriers so we can evaluate elections and politics based on something other than blacks will vote for blacks, Hispanics will vote for Hispanics. White, you know what I mean? I'd like this.
Yeah, we should be voting on policy. We should be voting on plans and agenda.
And on that note, and then now I got to get out of here. But on that note, it'll be fascinating because obviously Reverend Diaz is highly conservative, and it'll be fascinating if the other three, and if there are more, split the vote, and then he ends up winning as a result of that. Fascinating. Who knows? We got literally a year before that race comes to fruition next June. Michael Hinman, always a thrill to have you with us. And keep writing, keep doing your thing, keep editing, and we'll have you on the show again. Thank you so much.
Sounds great, Gary. Thanks.
Great. All right, we are going to take a short break, ladies and gentlemen. And when we come back, another editor, as I said, the editor of City Limits. And we'll be talking about rent regs, we'll be talking about affordable housing, we'll talk about this, that, and the other. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go long, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, it's Ava, and this is Tess from Vivo's Do-It-Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips.
Tie the strips into knots.
And glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. And as mentioned, our second editor of the evening. And let's go right now and say hello to our friend Jarrett Murphy, who's the editor at City Limits. Always nice to have you with us, Jarrett. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. It's always a pleasure to be on, Gary.
Great. Lots to talk about. This wasn't a piece that you wrote, but our friend Sadaf Ali Cully wrote this fascinating piece about Councilmember Salamanca kind of stepping in the middle of the city's plans to rezone Southern Boulevard, saying, I want the data of who is going to be displaced, residences and commercial tenants. I think this is, I hate to put it this way, somewhat of a revolutionary concept that somebody's going to really step in and stop the city from proceeding. Usually the council members cut a deal like they did on Jerome Avenue and move it forward. What do you think?
Well, there's still plenty of time for him to cut that deal. I mean, it is interesting. You know, this is another rezoning the city is planning. Would be in the same spirit as the rezoning on Jerome Avenue or Inwood or East New York. It's still at a very early stage, and Salamanca, as the council member for that district and also as the chairperson of the city's land use committee, would be in a pretty powerful position to shape the rezoning. And what he has said is interesting because that issue of displacement, the question of whether rezonings directly and indirectly force lower income people from a neighborhood, is the whole crux of the argument and the angst over rezonings. But what's interesting about him raising it at this stage is that it's a little early in the process. The city hasn't even officially begun the kind of environmental review where that kind of data is usually generated. And what's interesting is he said that he would block the rezoning if he didn't get the data, which is a transparency issue. He didn't make clear whether the content of the data mattered to him. In other words, whether there was some level of displacement that would be unacceptable. And what makes that fascinating is that one of the arguments in other neighborhoods was when the city did produce estimates of displacement, they were totally out of step with reality. You know, for instance, the city, when it does its official environmental review, considers all rent-stabilized tenants immune from displacement because of their legal protections, which of course would be nice, but isn't how it actually works.
Not the reality. Well, you know, there's so many issues that were raised up in what you just said. The first thing is the whole ULURP process. I have seen so many of these, and then as you watch the ultimate project play out, it almost doesn't matter what they put in these environmental reviews, because if they don't reflect reality, what happens then? I mean, it's like
right.
It's like a document that doesn't mean anything. One of the things that I know very well, because I was, let's be fair about it, I was an advocate against building that filtration plant in the northwest Bronx, and they put a lot of stuff in that environmental review that didn't bear out. That wasn't reality. They didn't even get the budget right, and
right.
So that's number one. Number two. What I think is significant, and I understand the distinction you drew between getting the data and then actually saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't fly, so I'm going to stop it, is that this is the first time that I'm aware of that an elected official in a position to do so actually jumped in the way and said, you know what, displacement is an issue. Many of the other elected officials say we're against it. They don't put their foot down. This, to me, I wonder if this will become somewhat of the norm because he's put his foot down and said, well, at least we got to understand what this data means.
Yeah, and Salamanca has, something of a record on this. He did put forward legislation to require that in any subsidized development in the city, that 15% of units be reserved for people coming out of the shelter system, which is a much more aggressive level than the city currently operates at. Is a pretty ambitious proposal, and so he's already kind of put his marker down on these issues, and he is a person who I don't think is necessarily averse to a rezoning in that area. I think there are elements of it that he likes. I know that he is conscious of the fact there is some localized opposition to it. It's very vocal. I don't know how abundant it is. And so, he is probably thinking both about the merits of the proposal and about protecting his political flanks, and he's got to think about both. So it is a really, really interesting turn of events, especially because, as we said before, he's the land use chairperson. So every rezoning that the city wants to do is going to come across his desk.
That's right. And then the last thing is you and I can just speculate. So you get the numbers. What's acceptable? 100, 1,000 residents, 2,000? I mean, at what point do you say, wait a minute, this is too much? And then, of course, also with the businesses. I mean, Southern Boulevard certainly has a lot of things going on down in that part of the Bronx. And so I don't know. I mean, how many businesses will? That would have been an interesting question for the council members Cabrera and Gibson to ask about Jerome Avenue, given 120 auto businesses down there. That would have been interesting. So we'll watch how it plays out, and we're going to urge everybody to keep their eyes peeled to city limits, and I assume you'll come to some resolve for us. I appreciate that.
We will. We'll stay on it, definitely.
The next thing, which was your story, is the idea of, you really defined, I think, very well the rent regulations debate. So everybody hears about it. I think people can feel it in the air that something's about to happen. Talk to me about what the debate looks like right now and where we're at.
So, these are the regulations that affect 966,000 apartments in the city, rent-stabilized apartments. About 2 million people live in them. And as happens every 4 years, they're up for renewal. And what's different is that because the Democrats now control all three levers of power in government, tenant advocates are hopeful that they're going to be able to change regulations to be much, much, much more favorable to tenants in a historic way. And there are a number of elements. There are 9 bills total that are being considered. Each of them touches a different part of the system. Getting rid of vacancy decontrol, which is when apartments hit a certain price threshold and they leave the system. Vacancy bonuses, which are a bump in rent that landlords get when they change owners and creates an incentive for evictions. All over the map. And, what I'm hearing now, and this is a fluid situation, Gary, it could be different between the time we have this conversation and the time someone turns off their TV, is that the good cause eviction issue is the one that's really the sticking point. This is a bill that would essentially extend rent stabilization to every rental unit in the state, regardless of the size of the building, and saying basically that landlords cannot refuse to renew a lease unless a tenant has really violated the terms of the lease, and or the apartment is going to be reverted to family use. And what it basically does is caps rent increases at some multiplier of the inflation rate. And basically says you can't evict someone simply because they won't pay rent that is above that cap. So it is a pretty revolutionary concept, and I think it's really causing a debate in Albany about what do people think about the power differential between property owners and property renters, and where that property where that line is properly drawn. Should the landlord have the right to basically say, like, hey, you can't live here anymore, I own this, or do tenants have a right to claim a space in the city on reasonable terms? I mean, it's a really, really fascinating topic.
So I don't know where I saw these. I'm going to bring up 2 items. I thought I saw somewhere that they were talking about a 3.5% increase. Whether that is reality or not. And, advocates create a great stir, and then it always seems to be, but we still came up with some sort of increase. So I don't know how reliable that number is. Do you have any thought about that? And my reason for bringing it, wait, before you do that, my reason for bringing it up is I did read I read so much, and I don't remember where I saw it, that a small property owner said, who's paying for the large repairs in my building? I've maintained this building. There are some big repairs. If I got to pay it, I don't have the funds to do that, and then you're all going to blame me because I have a substandard building, and so then I need this increase. Or do we just simply pass it along to tenants because they live there and let them pay for what they need?
Right. Well, what's interesting is we're going to find out in the next 20 days a lot about what's going to face renters. In Albany, the deadline is June 15th for the legal framework.
Right.
And then back in the city, the Rent Guidelines Board, which actually does the increases year to year, is considering, I think it's increases of 1.5 to 2.5%. And that decision will be rendered on June 25th. So by that point, we'll know not just what the rules of the road are, but what speed it's gonna move at over the next year. And I think that the point you made about capital improvements is an interesting one, and one that I think some housing experts are a little leery of removing the ability of landlords to pass on those costs to tenants. What I've heard is that some, and that, you know, many landlords should be able to achieve some reasonable repairs to buildings within the framework of annual rent increases. And basically, I think the problem is that the current system is very poorly regulated. The state approves about 90% of applications.
That's exactly. We only have a minute or two left, so I just want to jump in. That's exactly what I was thinking, because part of it is a credibility issue. That tenants say, well, then open your books. We don't believe that you are really hurting that badly and that you can't get these improvements done. And we got about 60 seconds, so I'm just going to throw this out. Carolyn McLaughlin, in her recent book, and then in an interview I did with her, said the only way we're going to build affordable housing that's cost efficient enough is with subsidies. And my point is, talk is cheap in Albany about all these things, but if they don't put funding into the teeth of some of these legislations, you're never going to get this stuff built. That's my own, and I agreed with Ms. McLaughlin on that.
I think that subsidies are certainly part of the picture for a lot of property. I mean, I think landlords are subsidized in lots of ways. The big thing, Gary, that isn't being talked about is property tax reform, and the fact that is tremendously unequal within the city toward multi-unit owners, and that gets passed on to tenants. That's something that Mayor de Blasio has done nothing to correct, even though everyone knows it. System. And I think landlords would have a much better position to operate their buildings from if they fix that system, and then you could have rent regs that protected tenants too.
Listen, Jarrett, thank you so much. I love the dialogue all the time. We'll read you and your colleagues in City Limits, but I also wanted to mention Wednesdays at 5 o'clock. What's the name of the show?
It's Max and Murphy on WBAI 99.5 FM.
Right, Wednesdays at 5 o'clock. I'm guessing you're the Murphy half of that.
That's very good, Gary. You're good. You're sharp.
It takes a while, yeah. Jarrett, listen, be well. Regards to your family, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Gary.
All right, there we go. What an enjoyable show this evening. We had Michael Hinman from the Riverdale Press and Jarrett Murphy from City Limits. And that's how we do it on Bronxnet Television, try to keep you informed about what's going on in the Bronx. This Monday night on Bronx Talk, Andy Cohen, Councilmember Cohen, will be our guest, and we'll talk about all the issues in his districts in the North Bronx. Have a good night. See you.